Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a stack of sources today that, I have to be honest, feels a little countercultural. We are unpacking the concept of the blessed life. And before you tune out thinking this is going to be about, manifesting a new car or something, just pause for a second.
Yeah, we should probably clear the deck on that phrase immediately. I mean, usually when we see hashtag blessed on a social feed, it's code for comfort, right?
Totally. It means things are going well, the sun is shining, life is easy.
It's a highlight reel.
Right. But the material we're diving into today, specifically excerpts from a book called The Anchored Heart and a sermon by Phillip Gibson, it just flips that definition completely.
It does. We're looking at a definition of blessed that has almost nothing to do with ease and everything to do with resilience.
So it's a massive shift.
A huge shift. We're moving from blessed equals comfortable to blessed equals unbreakable. Gibson's analysis focuses on Psalm 112, but he drags this ancient text right into the middle of modern anxiety.
He argues that a truly blessed life isn't one that escapes the storm.
No. It's a life that has been weathered by loss, by time, by what he calls evil tidings, and yet somehow remains standing.
And that's really the mission for this deep dive. We're looking for a blueprint for resilience. How do we face bad news, and there's so much of it, without just falling apart?
Exactly. And to answer that, we're not just looking at the psalm in a vacuum. We've got a heavy-hitting cast of characters today.
Yeah, I saw that. Howard Thurman, Dietrich, Bonhoeffer, John Wesley.
I mean, these are people who didn't write from an armchair. They wrote from the trenches of social upheaval, from prison cells. So when they talk about blessing, they mean something durable.
Something that works when the lights go out.
Yes.
There's a phrase in the notes that really jumped out at me. Spiritual geometry. It sounds a little abstract, maybe.
It does, but it's the perfect way to visualize it. Gibson frames the whole thing around the physics of the soul. It's about your center of gravity.
Okay.
If your center is, your circumstances, how your day is going, what the headlines are, you're going to be knocked over by the first strong wind.
But if you can shift that center to something stable,
then you achieve this spiritual geometry where you can lean into the wind without toppling over.
So let's look at the blueprint. We're starting with Psalm 112. Give us the architectural background here. What are we actually looking at?
We're looking at a piece of the wisdom tradition of Israel, and this distinction really matters. A lot of the Bible is history or prophecy.
Right. What happened or what might happen.
But wisdom literature is different. It's observational. It's like generations of people watching how life works and asking what actually holds up in the long run.
So it's data-driven, in a way.
In a way, yeah. It isn't a panic prayer shouted in a crisis. It is a reflection. And the source points out a structural detail that is totally invisible in English, but crucial in the original Hebrew. Psalm 112 is an acrostic.
An A to Z list.
Literally. Each line begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, all the way down.
Now, the source argues this wasn't just the poet showing off. There was a functional purpose for this.
It was a mnemonic device, a memory aid. You have to remember, this was an oral culture. This poem was designed to be memorized by children, recited in the village.
Carried in the mind.
Exactly. It was a teaching mechanism. The idea was to give the community a structured A to Z map of what a God-centered life looks like. So when the world went dark, they didn't have to invent a response. They had the script memorized.
I love that. A checklist for the soul. Speaking of which, the source dives deep into the very first word of the text, which is assure.
Yes. And translators usually render ashar as happy or blessed. But Gibson says happy is just too light, too emotional.
It's fleeting.
Right. Happiness is what you feel when your team wins. Asher implies something more like deeply well-situated.
Deeply well-situated. That feels structural. Like a house on bedrock versus a house on sand.
Precisely. It's about alignment. And that positioning leads us to the next phrase, which is often a huge stumbling block for us today. Fear of the Lord.
Yeah. I mean, fear is a negative word now. We go to therapy to get rid of fear. It sounds like living in terror of a tyrant.
And the source is very careful to distinguish this from terror. We are not talking about being scared of punishment. Gibson defines this fear as a reverent orientation.
A reverent orientation. What does that mean in practice?
Think of it like a compass. If you're navigating a ship, you fear the North Star. Not because it's going to hurt you, but because if you lose sight of it, you're completely lost.
That brings it back to the spiritual geometry. God stops being an accessory.
And becomes the center of gravity. Everything else, your money, your anxiety, your politics, orbits around that center.
John Wesley called this the moment faith moves from being an idea to Devotion.
Yes, a heart awakened. You're not just agreeing with a concept, you're paying extreme attention to what actually matters.
This leads into a fascinating comparison the source makes between the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, and Psalm 112. They almost seem to describe two different kinds of people.
It is a brilliant observation by Gibson. He frames it as the evolution of grace. If you look at the Beatitudes, Jesus is talking to a crowd that is desperate. They are empty, they are mourning, they're at the starting line.
Wesley would call that justifying grace, God meeting you where you are.
Exactly. But Psalm 112 feels sturdier. It's addressing someone further down the road. It asks, what does a person look like after that grace has had 20 years to do its work?
And that's sanctifying grace, the process of being shaped.
Yes. So in the Beatitudes, the blessing is for the poor in spirit, those who have nothing. But in Psalm 112, we see someone who has learned generosity.
Right, and Jesus blesses those who mourn, but Psalm 112 shows a heart that's no longer ruled by fear.
It's a progression. The argument isn't that one is right and the other is wrong. It's that one is the seed and the other is the tree.
The empty person becomes the steady person.
And that steadiness is the key. Resilience isn't a personality trait. It's something you are formed into.
Which brings us to the core conflict of the text. Verse 7 says, they are not afraid of evil tidings.
And notice the realism there.
Yeah.
It doesn't say evil tidings will never come.
No, it assumes they're coming.
The promise isn't a shelter from the storm, it's resilience within the storm.
To explain this, the sermon brings in Howard Thurman, a massive figure. And there's this story from his childhood in Daytona, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
It's just incredible.
It's so powerful. You have to get the context. Thurman was a young boy raised by his grandmother who had been born into slavery. One night, a fire breaks out.
And in the Jim Crow South, a fire at night wasn't just a fire.
No. It was a signal. It meant crowds were gathering. It meant the potential for mob violence, for racial terror.
The air was filled with panic.
Pure panic. But his grandmother's reaction was just completely counterintuitive. She didn't run. She didn't scream.
Sat down.
She sat down in her rocking chair on the porch. She opened her Bible, and she started reading the Psalms aloud into the darkness.
Wow, just
Yeah.
imagine that scene.
Thurman said that night changed him. He looked at her and realized she had inner freedom. She had zero external power, no protection, no status.
But she had an anchored heart.
Yes. The fear was real, but it could not rule her soul. She had a center of gravity that the mob just couldn't touch.
That is resilience. It's not ignoring the fire. It's not letting the fire dictate who you are inside.
And that connects directly to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's writing about this from a Nazi prison cell facing execution. He argued the Psalms are not warm fuzzies. They are, in his words, schooling in trust.
Schooling in trust. I love that. It implies effort, a curriculum.
It does. Bonhoeffer's point was that the firm heart in Psalm 112 isn't willpower. You don't just wake up and decide to be brave. It's formed through daily obedience, ordering your life around that North Star.
So that when the crisis hits, the foundation is already built.
Exactly. It's a difference between a house on sand and one on rock. The storm hits both houses. The difference is the foundation.
So we've talked about this internal state, the anchored heart. But the source makes a hard pivot here. This can't just stay inside your head, right? It has to leak out.
Right. Resilience has a public face. And this brings us back to John Wesley, who believed holiness is not withdrawal. It is deeper engagement with the world.
And the source argues that a holy life becomes more tender and more generous, not more rigid or judgmental.
Absolutely. We often think of religious firmness as being closed off. But Psalm 112 says the righteous are gracious, merciful. They lend freely. They give to the poor. They are open-handed.
The source brings in Gardner C. Taylor here, who says righteousness must be visible. It's not an abstract theory.
And then Barbara Brown Taylor adds this layer of ordinary holiness.
What does she mean by ordinary?
Well, we think of faith as dramatic heroism, walking into the fire. But she says it's often just the quiet courage to live generously in an anxious world.
So, the mundane stuff.
Right.
Lending money, giving to the poor, conducting business with justice.
Those are the public habits. They're the external evidence of the internal anchor. You can't claim to have an anchored heart if your hands are closed tight. The source is basically arguing that generosity is a symptom of bravery.
This feels like the perfect bridge to the modern application, because the source gets pretty specific about the evil tidings of our current moment.
It really doesn't pull any punches. And looking at this objectively through the lens of the sermon, Gibson names the anxieties of the modern world. Political polarization, racism, the normalization of cruelty.
And the warning here is about our reaction to those headlines.
Exactly. The source says the temptation when bad news travels fast, and let's be honest, fear is a profitable industry right now, is to close in, to harden up, to protect ourselves.
Gibson says, fear is profitable, outrage is addictive. That hits close to home. It is so easy to just doom scroll and feel yourself getting harder.
It's a survival instinct, but the Psalm 112 way is to refuse to let fear disciple you.
Do not let fear disciple you. What does that mean, to be discipled by fear?
It means letting fear be your teacher, letting fear tell you how to treat your neighbor, how to vote, how to spend your money. It goes back to Thurman. The first battleground is the soul.
If you become cruel because you're afraid of cruelty, then the evil tidings have already won.
You've become the thing you feared. And Bonhoeffer takes it a step further. He says it's not enough to bandage the victims. You have to put a spoke in the wheel of injustice.
So resilience isn't passive. It's the strength you need to stand up and intervene.
Exactly.
So what is the ultimate purpose of all this? The source wraps up with what grace is actually for.
This is the capstone. The source argues that grace isn't just for getting forgiven. We often stop there. But Gibson argues grace is for getting formed.
Formed into what?
Formed into people steady enough to face evil without becoming evil.
To face evil without becoming evil. That is an incredibly high bar.
It is the ultimate test of the blessed life. Can you stand in the middle of a fire like Thurman's grandmother and maintain your humanity? Can you keep your heart firm when the headlines are terrifying?
It just completely changes the definition of success. It's not about avoiding the storm. It's about who you become in the storm.
Precisely. It's about having a character that actually holds up under the weight of it all.
So as we wrap up, we're left with a pretty significant challenge. We started with the idea of a blessed life being easy, and we've ended with it being a faithful one, a battle-tested one.
A life that is generous, steady, and unafraid.
I want to leave you with one final thought from the source material to chew on. It's a question I think we all need to sit with. In a world that is constantly teaching us to fear our neighbor, to hoard what we have, to build higher walls, do you have the ordinary courage to keep your hands open when the rest of the world is closing its fists?
That is a question.
Thanks for diving in with us.
Until next time.